it took me getting into a bigger room to really make that shift, to really realize like I could do more, and more isn't necessarily harder. In fact, I found the exact opposite. It has been so much less work.
You've done all kinds of real estate investing, and you probably spend a good amount of time, probably longer than you should, with smaller stuff, smaller
Yes.
multis. But I would say the last couple of years, you have just shifted into mobile home parks, large scale, and now multifamily. And I'm just wondering what precipitated that shift.
Yeah. So, up until we'll call it 3.5 years ago, I did all the small stuff like duplexes, triplexes. I'd flip a house a couple times a year. Very much what I like, just a small real estate investor. Nothing wrong with that. And a lot of people, they spend their entire life in that kind of small space. But I just started feeling that the word I've been using lately is like not aligned. Like I wasn't aligned with what I could do. Right. And I went to a conference. I went to a real estate conference, and I was on stage speaking, and everyone there at this conference, like even the people in the audience, were doing way more things than I was doing, like way bigger projects. And the only reason I got on stage there to teach these people anything is because I got a podcast and a big mouth. And so I realized that I didn't deserve to be there, but I wanted to deserve to be there. I wanted to be, bigger than I could do. Like you just kind of like rest on your laurels sometimes. And I was like doing it for too long. So I went home from that event and I said, you know what? No, I'm going to do something bigger. I'm going to launch myself a real estate syndication brand and buy a bunch of multifamily. And that's what started it.
It's so funny. So you were struggling with your own mindset at that point.
Yeah, very much so. Because like when you're like, this is just a lesson in general, right? When you're in a room where you are the one doing the most amount of stuff, like when I would hang around with all my real estate friends, like they were doing 1-2 flips a year. And I felt pretty good about myself. When you compare yourself to people in a room where you're the smartest guy or the most successful guy, you feel pretty good. It took me getting into a bigger room to really make that shift, to really realize like I could do more, and more isn't necessarily harder. In fact, I found the exact opposite. It has been so much less work to scale than I ever imagined. I mean, I'm putting in way fewer hours today than I did back when I was trying to do one house a year. It's crazy. It was all a mindset shift.
Now, your first foray into commercial was mobile home parks. Why did you decide to pick that asset class?
Yeah, I mean, I picked mobile home parks simply because I had this like fire about it. Like there's no real reason. Like some people right now are super fired up about like cryptocurrency. Like they just love Bitcoin and they're reading everything about it and they're doing all this stuff with Bitcoin. I couldn't care less about Bitcoin. Like I just don't, it doesn't fire me up. I'm not saying it's not a good investment or it's not a good product or the technology is not amazing. I'm sure it is. It doesn't fire me up, and therefore I don't pursue it. And for whatever weird reason, mobile home parks just fired me up. When I interviewed people on our podcast on mobile home parks, it fired me up. And so it's the lesson I try to follow my life is like, follow that fire. Like for whatever reason, something fires you up, lean into that because it's something in your soul is like, that's a cool thing. And if it fires me up, maybe I'll stick with it long enough to make it successful. So it fired me up. Now there are logical reasons why I like mobile home parks. And we can go into that all day long about I think they're recession resistant and I like the opportunity for infill and like, we're adding units to a property. I love all that, but in reality, it was more important that I decided something than what I decided, and so I just went with it.
Well, and then of course you guys shifted pretty big into multifamily as well. In fact, you wrote a book with Brian Murray about this called The Multifamily Millionaire, which is you guys launched in August on Amazon, which is super cool. Required reading by everyone watching, listening to this. Why the shift? And are you replacing mobile home parks permanently, or what is your direction?
Yeah, we've gotten into apartments mainly through JVs, like partnerships, because the one thing that we do really, really well is raise money. We're just like, it's my position on the Bigger Pockets podcast. My Instagram is at 250,000 followers. Like we raised $100 million in the past year and a half off Instagram, which is just unbelievable, right? It just shows a shift in the world, like where social media has taken us, where like we can do that. Now, we're not amazing at apartments yet. I don't actually believe we are the world's best apartment. I mean, you guys kill me on apartments, on your knowledge and your depth of like being able to manage the asset and find the deals. Now, I believe we are the best at mobile home parks that I know, but we're not apartments. So instead, we choose to JV with other apartment syndicators who are the best in their market, who are the best in their market, who have put in the time and the suffering and the passion. And then we bring our money raising ability to it. At the same time, we're learning. We want to get more into apartments again, because like I mean, here's the thing. Average mobile home park purchase for us is $4 million. If you'd average out of the last 2 years of buying 20 some parks, we're averaging about $4 to $5 million total a piece. Our apartments, we bought a 34 million, a 57, and a 71. So those 3 apartment deals we've now bought are worth a little bit more than our entire collection of 20 mobile home parks. Yet the work involved was about a quarter of the work. So it's a no-brainer. Yes, we want to get into multifamily, the larger stuff. I don't want to get away from mobile home parks, but there's also only 2,000 mobile home parks in the country that we can buy, period. There's only 2,000 parks that are large enough for me to go after. So how many are going to go for sale any given year? Maybe a couple hundred. How many are we going to land? Maybe a dozen. And so it's just such a small space. We can't scale any more than about 100 million a year in mobile home parks.
So you and Brian wrote this book, Multifamily Millions. Cool. It's got 2 volumes, one blue, one dark blue.
Yeah.
And you kind of start with you differentiate between small multis and large multis. Yeah. And there's some pros and cons of each. Can you talk about a little bit in your mind, kind of what is the pros and cons of small versus large?
Yeah, I'll start with the differentiation real quick, because a lot of people think of this a little different than I do. So a lot of the world thinks of small multi as 1, 2, or 2, 3, and 4 units, because that's how banks look at it. And 5 units and greater is large multi. But I don't, because I've bought 5-unit properties before, and I use pretty much the exact same approach as I did to buy a 4-plex. There's really no difference there. But when I bought a 300-unit property, that is a very different game, right? Very different game. Like different types of banks, different types of raising money for that kind of thing, different LLC structure, different everything, right? So the difference is not in unit number. The difference is in approach. There's a small way to invest and a large way to invest. I give one of the clearest examples I would say is if you know your tenants' names, that's in your property, that's probably you're approaching it in a small way. If you're managing yourself, small multi. If you're raising money and you're buying it in an LLC and you have a team, that's more of a large. So, pros and cons. The large stuff has a lot more risk to it, right? The large stuff has a lot more moving parts, and you have to be good at business. To be good at buying duplexes, you don't really have to be good at business. You just got to be able to good at, knowing how to buy a duplex and making sure your tenants are happy. So they're different skill sets. On the other hand, small multi might be easier and require a lot less cash and a lot less of a team and a lot less management, but you can only get so big. You're not going to buy $1 billion of duplexes. No one's doing you're just not. But you could buy $1 billion of real estate in a fairly short amount of time if you're doing the large deals.
The question for you, having done a little bit of everything at this point, you have the benefit of hindsight, right? Should someone approach the multifamily game with a more of a big thinking or little thinking and kind of leg into it? In other words, can you skip the little thinking and get right into the big thinking? And is that beneficial, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, generally I think you should go through the small stuff to get to the big, because there's a caveat I'll get to in a second, but generally I think you should start small and scale up. I think you're going to learn a lot of lessons on the duplex, 4-plex, 10-unit. That's going to benefit you on the 50-unit, 100-unit, 200-unit. That said, the exception to that is if you can harness somebody else's mistakes and learn from them. So, for example, if you partner with somebody or you hire somebody to coach and train you, like you guys have like your coaching program, if you go through that, then you get to learn from your coach's experience and all of their failures. And that is a way to bypass it. Now, does that cost money? Yes. So you can pick your pain. You pick your pain. You can either go through the pain on your own, or you could hire someone else or partner with someone. But then you're giving away a lot of your equity. You might be giving away half or more of your company to go large. So yeah, pick your pain.
Yeah. So what's kind of your advice for people to get started? And because there's 2 different paths. You can go the duplex route, or you can think the bigger thing. And I've seen it both ways. Honestly, at the end of the day, they all lead to the same result, which is financial freedom. Yeah. One might take a little longer than the other one. On the other hand, those people who take a little longer, they build up a portfolio of stuff that they end up owning themselves. And it typically does take longer, but they own their portfolio themselves. They too get the financial freedom. And then you get people who have 3 partners, and they get the 500 units in 18 months, and they're just approaching it with a big thinking. Yeah. What is your perspective on how should someone get started to get into the game besides reading your book?
Yeah. I think I mean, a lot of it goes back to the same advice I gave earlier, which is follow your fire, right? If you've got a fire, if you're fired up about buying an apartment complex, then answer that question. How do I buy an apartment, like a large apartment complex? But if you're like fired up by the idea of buying a fourplex in your local town and maybe living in one of the units and renting it out and like scrappy entrepreneurship style, if that fires you up, then do that and start with that thing. So really it's like, what do you want? Now at the same time, I'll tell you a quick story. I interviewed a guy once on my podcast who flipped 100 houses his first year. Very first year flipping houses, flipped 100 houses. And I was like, I was like struggling doing 1 or 2 a year. And I asked him, how did you flip 100 houses? And he said, well, all my friends flipped hundreds of houses a year. So I didn't know that's not normal. I didn't know that wasn't how it's supposed to be done. And I love that, like that lesson of like it's all a mindset game. If you approach it like, oh yeah, I just do big deals and all your friends are doing, the people you surround yourself with, their mindset is going to rub off on you. So if you're surrounded by people who are doing small multifamily deals, you probably should just do the multifamily deals because that's where you're going to be comfortable. But if you can get into a group of people who are doing bigger deals, whether you have to pay for it or whether you have to just make those friends somehow or whatever you got to do to get into those groups, then the natural thing you're going to do is the bigger deals. So I guess the advice I have is get around people who are doing what you want to do and have the mindset you want to have.